next up, boy howdy, do we have an exciting panel. This is the Alpha and Omega Securing Open Source Through Direct Maintainer Engagement panel. We have an amazing set of industry luminaries. I would invite up to the podium, please, so that I'll start announcing you as you amble up. First off, my dear friend Yesenia. She's a senior software security engineer for Alpha Omega, an OpenSSF project. Over the last 10 years, she's dedicated her career into being a servant leader to the software engineer and cybersecurity realm, pioneering teams and systems for security operations, DevSecOps, and supply chain security by executing on never been done. As a cybersecurity big sister, she has founded several women in tech organizations, particularly in the South Florida area, and is the co-founder of Latinas in Cyber. Thank you, Yesenia. Next up, I invite Ram to come join us. Ram is the chief evangelist for Cloud Foundry Foundation. He is an engineer by practice and an educator at heart. He was pushed into technology evangelism along his journey as a developer and hasn't looked back since. He enjoys helping engineering teams around the world discover new and creative ways to work. Next up, can I have Munawar? He is the founder and head of innovations at OpenRefactory, an application security company that intends to improve the way developers write secure, reliable, and compliant code. Munawar has a body of work of automated bug fixing in academia. Next up, can I have Mikael? Mikael is passionate for software engineering. He enjoys building user-centric software and solutions. His experience is diverse and includes things from architecture to team management. He started programming at age 8. Holy cow, I was playing with G.I. Joes and Legos then. Started programming at 8 in ST Basic and hasn't stopped ever since. He has changed his language, though. He is constantly questioning of trust has led him to his current position. And finally, we have Walter. Walter is the Rust Foundation security engineer. He comes with a 14-year career in security, and for the past 7 years, he's specialized in offensive security in the gaming industry, leading efforts to find and mitigate vulnerabilities across tens of millions of players at Epic Games and Blizzard Entertainment. Thank you, I appreciate that. Prior to that, he's worked as a security consultant, providing pen testing, red teaming, and code review services for many Fortune 100 companies. Walter also has a passion for technical security problems and has built a career in helping craft novel solutions to the new challenging issues in security. So, esteemed panel, we're talking about Alpha and Omega through direct maintainer engagement. Take it away, please.
Thank you, Crow. So, first and foremost, thank you to the panelists who have joined us today. Thank you for those who are participating. I have a bug feature in my speech that will crack. It's like your car that makes these noises and eventually goes away. So we're just going to ignore it, and it's going to go away, okay? So today we are talking about securing open source software through direct maintainer engagement. So first question for our panelists is a set of introductions, but don't just go ahead and introduce yourself. Share a fun fact of your first exposure to open source software. Discuss your foundation or organization and your role in that project. And then share a little bit about your background, and we'll just go down the line.
Thank you. So I'm Mikael Barbero. I work at the Eclipse Foundation. I'm the head of security over there. So we help our project improve the security posture of the supply chain. So that's my role today, to help them do that. And thanks to Alpha Omega. So for those who don't know about the Eclipse Foundation, we are the largest open source foundation from Europe. So we are based in Brussels. We are a not-for-profit organization, AASBL, for those who know about the Belgian laws and regulation. We are the home, of course, of the Eclipse ID. So I guess that you know us mostly for that, but we're also the home of the Jetty project, but also Adoptium, Jakarta EE, and ASCII-Doc, and so many other fantastic projects.
Thank you.
So, like she said, I'm Walter Pearce. At the Rust Foundation, our role is mainly to shepherd and help out the project. the Rust project and the language, kind of promoting memory safety. Myself specifically, I was brought in to not only threat model the security of sort of Rust as a language, but also Rust as an ecosystem, all the packages around it, as well as the project itself, and to kind of determine what's the security posture there, how can we get ahead of it, what we can do. To answer the question of like, where was I first in open source? I've been contributing the majority of my career, beginning with just doing security research in my early teens and submitting pull requests way back in the day. And, I've always loved security that way. But what we're really trying to do with the foundation and with my role specifically in the foundation is to really engage with the project and figure out how we can help them sort of meet the needs as we go through threat model, what's, the risks within the project, the ecosystem, the language, and get ahead of those things and see what resources we can bring to bear to help the project.
Thank you, Walter, for your endless contribution to the open source. Munawar?
So about the first question, I'm a little bit hesitant whether I should answer that question or not, because I feel like that's a side channel attack to find out about our age group that we're in. But anyway, so my first open source project was back in the grad school when I was doing my master's thesis. I was looking into the security architecture of 4 different mail transfer agents and identifying what are the different kinds of design decisions that created those architectures. So I wrote a paper that eventually, so my master's thesis eventually turned into a paper that was taught in advanced architecture schools later in schools like Carnegie Mellon, University of Illinois, UBC here as well. I'm extremely proud of that work, but yeah, that kind of reveals what age group I'm in. As far as my current work, I'm the CEO of OpenRefactory. We are a static analysis company that is building a better bug detection tool that detects bugs that other tools miss and also does that with dramatically low false positive. Thank you.
Thank you. Ram?
Hey everyone, I'm Ram. I'm Chief Evangelist at the Cloud Foundry Foundation. What that means is I tend to deal with 2 kinds of PRs, pull requests and press releases. So I manage a bit of the community stuff along with a lot of the marketing and other things. Cloud Foundry Foundation is home to the Cloud Foundry project. I think mentioning Cloud Foundry generally tends to really reveal the age group of the cohort that we're talking to. And we're home to the Cloud Foundry project and a bunch of other open source projects. I was led into open source fiddling with Ubuntu as a teenager, and then ever since there's been some open source project or the other at work, at school, and other places. At Cloud Foundry, we are starting to explore supply chain security, and that led me down this rabbit hole, and I'm happy to be here and share my experiences and appreciation for this field.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. Yes, it's an endless rabbit hole that we're trying to find the light through in this day and age. I'm going to move, and this is going to be a little bit of an interactive panel, and we have slides. Boom. In 2022, the Linux Foundation came out with a research on the state of the open source ecosystem. Several of the stats that we have is, I'll read it out for the panelists who unfortunately can't see this, but 40% of all vulnerabilities were found in transitive dependencies. Less than 49% of organizations have a security policy of open source security development or usage. And time to fix has increased 20% longer than preparatory projects. So we can go down the line or ad hoc. Share what's the global security impact of this research and those entering, and if the open source world could change or do one thing to reducing numbers, what could we do?
So I have a comment on those numbers. The first thing that we see that it's not, those numbers are pretty high and pretty frightening, I guess. It's not because of open source developers that are bad or they don't care about security. It's just because they don't have time. And our philosophy at the Eclipse Foundation is to actually help our projects and our committers to improve their security, but not by putting more burden on their shoulders. So we really want to create services and help them improve through those services that we provide. So that would be one thing that would really help our project, is initiative like Alpha Omega to support open source developers rather than putting some new regulation, for instance, that may be coming our ways.
Very good.
Yeah, so from my specific perspective, I have to say I'm a little bit biased, where first I'll say that the majority of those vulnerabilities probably come from memory unsafety, so why not just use Rust? But sans that, what we're specifically trying to do within the Rust ecosystem is largely empower the developers and provide tooling and insights and kind of surface security issues to them in a way that, just general open source maintainers don't have time to do. So, the maintainers, they're developing their one, project that they like. This is their passion. They wrote this thing, but they're not a security expert. And even just asking them, hey, go run static analysis. A lot of developers, you tell them that, they don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. They don't know what tooling to use. And so we're trying to provide, more automated tooling from the ecosystem standpoint to kind of surface vulnerabilities that, the Rust project and the community as a whole kind of sees as worthwhile looking for, and finding ways to surface that to the maintainers so they can at least get visibility into what their issues are, so they'll understand what they are and find out if they can even actually fix that. No, I think that's kind of the main approach we're taking, and I think that's definitely something that would help, all projects as a whole. As a lot of the time, it's not even that they're not bad developers, they don't write bugs, but you don't know what you don't know, and helping them know what they don't know is a good first step.
Very good points.
Yeah, so my take on this is that the numbers are frightening, but it is very consistent to what you find in the wild when you talk with the developers. So with, under the Identifying Security Threats Working Group, we recently organized a mini summit for maintainers of critical open source projects. And one of the consistent themes that came out from that particular conversation was when developers or maintainers start an open source project, they don't expect that the project would be instantaneously famous, or like nobody starts a project to be famous. The project becomes famous, and then a lot of extra workload comes in. Specifically, the security is something that none of the maintainers initially sign up for, but they become critical because a lot of people start using that. So this always comes like extra work. And there's not enough incentive that's from the maintainer side to do that extra work. Now, how do we create that incentive? I'm too young to answer that.
Yeah, I often find that application of these best practices are very non-uniform across projects. Like even within the communities that we manage, there's probably some working groups and some teams that are very conscious of what needs to be done for better security and things like that, versus some others who are just moving seemingly too fast to apply what we generally call best practices. So it's tough in any sort of software development practice or org. It's even tougher to make sure that these standards are followed in an open source world.
Very good points. Thank you for that. Continuing on the same train of thought, what should those entering the open source world or continuing their contributions to the open source world, either as contributors or maintainers, think about to help decrease these numbers?
I think different models can play here. We could do some very basic sanity checks in terms of what they're doing. A lot of developers over time have picked up the practice of something like unit testing, let's say. And so is something about security applicable to open source maintainers and open source contributions is something we could figure out and make contributors go through every time they do. Something as complicated as a dojo model could also be introduced if it's very important that these security practices be applied. So depending on what stage and what maturity level a project is in, we could bring in some of these more collaborative practices to improve general security stance.
Very good.
So it may come in from my bias, but I strongly feel that the developers deserve better tooling. And by better tooling, so I'm very familiar with static analysis tools. So when you look at the current static analysis tools, they're fraught with false positives. So you have, I mean, the developers just have knobs in front of them. Tune this in, tune that out, and so on. At this point, they should really have an autopilot, Tesla autopilot, or let's not put Tesla in there, but an autopilot mode, static analysis tool, or any tools that's out there available for them. Instead, they're asked to like drive a plane with all of these knobs and the bells and whistles around that. So I strongly feel that the tooling needs to improve, and that would reduce the workload on the developers.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of second that from the tooling perspective. Like within the Rust language, we have tools like Miri, Clippy, the Rust language server. All of these provide a kind of baseline of making sure you're writing at least sane idiomatic Rust code. Miri itself actually does a lot of sanity checks on when you're using unsafe context inside of Rust, and will tell you that you may have, some sort of undefined behavior. You may be hitting an edge case. But that tooling's all optional, and it's all still, like you said, tuning the knobs and needing to figure out what flags you're using. But it's the building blocks are there for providing a more advanced tooling to actually help them write, not just idiomatic Rust code, but also safer Rust code because they're developing that way. And I can see that definitely help across other languages as well. But the tooling's very disparate and different among all of the languages, and so I'd like to see some more conformity around that.
So yeah, again, it falls back to what the developers have the time to do and what they are focusing on delivering new features and fixing bugs, but the security and deploying new tools is really not something that you can force them to or create some incentive to do. So the real thing is really to make it easier for them to consume those information and to create some services to help them deploy them for their project and help them tailor it to their own needs.
Yes, very good points. Thank you. We're going to change to a non-distracting slide as we proceed. I'm going to go into a quick introduction for Alpha Omega for those that aren't too familiar with the project. The idea is the beginning and the end of our security vulnerabilities across the open source ecosystem. You have the Alpha side that's working with foundations to help them not only fund security initiatives, but also helping them become self-sufficient so they can continue on the progress of moving forward to the security operations of their organizations and foundations. On the Omega side, we're looking to automate vulnerability identification, triaging, remediation, and automated pull requests across 10,000 critical open source projects. So as individuals in your field working with the projects and organizations you're with, please share what your initial reactions were when first hearing about the Alpha Omega project.
I think the Alpha Omega project came across as an amazing initiative from the OpenSSF, because a large part of the trouble that I see in terms of the contributors not being sensitized enough, the contributors lacking the time, contributors. So there's like a long tail of these issues about why contributors are unable to prioritize security stuff. And so I think this entire initiative is a nice sort of break in that path, and it introduces a means to mitigate a lot of problems that could come from this potentially infinite number of excuses that maintainers seem to have to not want to do that work.
Yeah, I've been working with the Alpha Omega people for some time, so I'm biased. This is obviously a great initiative, long due, and especially because it's not only like considering the tooling side, which is the Omega side, but at the same time being taking a very humane approach in like working with the maintainer side as well. So making that balance is very critical, and that's the best side because there's the Omega, but there's also the Alpha side.
Yeah, and I'd say my positions basically exist, partially because of Alpha Omega, and I think it's kind of a very good approach when we think about security in open source projects in general. There's kind of two aspects to it. One is the maintainers, feeling either a moral or technical imperative to write secure software, but then, we also have the concept over the years that has been talked about where it's open source, so we have many eyes. but security has shifted a lot over the past 10, 15 years, where those many eyes don't have the sexy factor looking at the random open source project and finding vulnerabilities in that. So they'll always be going after the high value targets, the things that can get them kudos, the things that may pay them out on HackerOne or bug bounty programs. And a lot of the smaller projects, or even just the not as cool projects to find vulnerabilities in, lack in security coverage from what we consider the many eyes perspective. And I think that's also something that Alpha Omega helps a lot with, is helping us, embed with the maintainers and with the foundations, where we can provide those resources for the not so cool, but still as necessary, if not more, security efforts.
Yeah, agreed with my co-panelist. It's a very great initiative. At last, I would say even. So just for your information, last year at that time of the year, there was 0 people at the Eclipse Foundation focusing on security, on helping our project on security. We are now 5 people, and that's what Alpha Omega enabled for us. And for us, Alpha Omega is really about building capacity. It helps us going through the journey of supply chain security. Security is not an event, it's really a journey, something that will happen in the long run. And what Alpha Omega provides is really being able to create momentum with our projects and create momentum with our community, with our members, in order to build capacity and run this security effort in the long run.
Yes, Alpha Omega has touched many lives, as well as my position here, and I'm very grateful for it. If any, what impacts do you envision a project like Alpha Omega having on your organization or foundation?
Well, particularly to the Cloud Foundry Foundation, I think there's already a vulnerability management working group that's taking care of a lot of aspects. And in this case, I think something like Alpha Omega would amplify their reach greatly. And like I said, there's always a non-uniform application of security best practices, largely because of lack of education, lack of time, lack of knowledge of tooling, and things like that. And so if this can come in and make a more homogeneous outcome available across all of the different contributors, I think that would be fantastic. And I think this applies even more to other foundations who might not have specific resources or working groups dedicated to security and vulnerabilities and things like that. I think it has a much greater role to play for foundations that are smaller or newer and things like that.
So I'm not representing a foundation, a software company, so there's no direct relationship with Alpha Omega so far yet. It's just a passion play. I mean, I really believe in the cause, and that's why we're working with these guys. But yeah, if there's something down the line, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I can say from our perspective, we've already seen tangible benefits. Besides my position, we also have 2 software engineers that have already been, pushing and contributing code within the Rust ecosystem. So, we've already, taken this from the point where we had a slew of issues within various portions of the project, different projects within the Rust project that we had known issues, we had known deficiencies, we knew that there were places we could do things better, but just churn in an open source project, just by the nature of it, we didn't have the time or the people or the volunteers to actually work on those things. And now we've had the resources and the people to be able to sit down and do that. And within their first weeks starting with the foundation, we're already getting code pushed and seeing momentum moving there. So I'm super excited for it.
So I already talked a little bit about the impact and the number of people we have now on the security team, but some of the examples that the impact we already had on our projects. So the first thing, we created a SALSA badging program. So now we are promoting the SALSA framework to all of our projects and to publish their current level of compliance with SALSA, so they cannot do that on their project page at the Eclipse Foundation. We are also actively involved into fixing some of the repository configuration of the developer accounts, promoting best practices to FA. It's coming to GitHub, but it's not only about GitHub, right? Over the open sources. Also, at some other place than GitHub. We actually also have software developers, software engineers who created some tools to help us manage all those repositories on GitHub and elsewhere at scale. So, for instance, we have thousands of repositories on GitHub and more than 100 organizations. So managing that and verifying that all the settings are properly set in order to have a secure environment. It's some tooling that we needed and that we are developing. Just a shameless plug, I have a talk about that tomorrow. And I can't remember. It's at 4 something, supply chain security con. And the last impact that we have is that we revamped our security policy, and now we are actively involved with the projects and the security researchers who report vulnerabilities to our projects to help with the communications. Sometimes the researchers are pretty blunt about the issues they found, and we need to ask them to explain it a little bit more in order for the project to be able to take it, to understand what's the issue, but sometimes the project is not responsive and it requires some nagging in order for them to reply in a timely fashion, because we don't want the researcher to go to the black market and sell those 0 days sometimes they can find. So we need to make them understand all of that. And that what has been the impact of Alpha Omega so far.
Very good, very good. I'm all about soft plugs, and with that, I'm going to share my soft plug. We have just soft launched our website, so there's a lovely QR code, and if you're looking to contribute and work with the project, that's some of the information of how to work with us and contribute. And back to the panel. About mid last year, Red Hat released a partner model documentation of how their supply chain team has worked with the product engineering. I'm a little biased. I come from Red Hat supply chain team, and I've seen the effects of how efficient working with your maintainers, your different areas and business units to really tackle the security controls and the security concerns. Now, it's a different story within the open source world, as the very scarce resource that's been shared across most of the talks, which is a maintainer's time. So part of the partnership model brings in your stakeholders at a very early stage of your design and your implementations. So with the scarce resource, like a maintainer's time, is a partnership possible in the open source security world? Ooh, we got silence.
I can take it.
Go
Stab at
ahead.
that one. It's a very hard question. Actually, we see that also for security audits that we are doing, partnering with OSTIF. Committed time to fix issues that is found or that is being discussed by third parties external to the project is really hard to get to. So I don't see how it cannot work, but the incentive, create the incentive and having people involved into those partnership is probably down to having more people doing some of the work initially and the prior work and leave the minimal amount of work to the project to do. So merging a PR is fine, but fixing and reviewing a lot of code or a lot of large patch and so on is definitely a no-go. So it's really about reducing the gap and giving the project the smallest amount of work to do.
I think it's a mixed bag, to be honest. The optimist in me sees a lot of opportunity. I think it's the only way to move forward and kind of disrupt this thing that maintainers tend to deprioritize and not pay enough attention to. And in terms of introducing a partnership that can, push things forward, keep the sort of momentum going on these security initiatives and things like that. But on the other side, I've been working partnerships in ecosystems for years now, and things always don't go according to plan. And it can be very hard, even though two teams have like a lot of shared goals and harmonize a lot in terms of what they want to achieve. Because of these commercial tectonic forces that act outside the best interests of the open source community itself, it can be hard to achieve something. But I think the optimist in me wins this time, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yes, that's kind of the way to do it, and let's put our resources behind that and see what happens.
I can quickly share a story. So as part of like our company's involvement with the Alpha Omega project, we have been looking at finding bugs in various open source projects, triaging them, and then working with the maintainers to fix those bugs. So there was a couple of POCs that we ran before. And so in the first phase, when we did that, we manually created but automatically synthesized the pull requests that we were passing to the maintainers. Some of the maintainers were rejecting the bugs, and even though they were valid bugs. So this is an exact code. Thank you, bot, but I'm not going to listen to a bug report from coming from a bot, although that was a valid bug that was being filed. So what we did was we did something called a fire hose interview that's done in the empirical study research. We talked with them, as in like what could be done to improve that thing. And one of the things that came out was the maintainers feel like if the reports were coming from like a bot or appears to come like a bot, there is a distrust that comes in the first place, because the maintainers have seen similar reports coming from bot, which turns out to be false positive before. So then there's a distrust. But if they feel like there's somebody behind this, there's a human behind this on this end as well, that improves upon that. So the first time we did the POC, the next time we tweaked our report based on the feedback. The first time 25% of the bugs that we reported were accepted. The next time it was 42% or something. So there's, if the reporting process is improved, that there's a human touch to that, it could impact upon the acceptability, and the maintainers would pay more attention to that.
Thank you. We are running short on time. I see it from the goose himself. The goose, right? Or am I confusing animals again? Moving over to bug reports, disclosure policies, and automated pull requests. What challenges have you faced with bug reports from external contributors, and what impact would automated pull requests have for your organization or foundation?
So just to reply to Munawar, we also use some tools to fix some security issues that we find on our projects and implement some of the best practices from the OpenSSF scorecard. What we try to avoid this kind of situation where the project will just reject the pull request because it's created by automated tools. So what we do, and I think that's something, a real lesson that we should all learn, is to engage with those people before using those tools. So we communicate with them that our intent, what is the goal of those pull requests that may be created or not, and what is the tool, what are the findings and the reasoning behind those findings. It really helps. We found that it really helps with the acceptance of those pull requests.
I'd say Russ also has kind of a unique perspective of this for us from a vulnerability prioritization and ranking perspective. The Rust language itself is rather unique in how they prioritize and categorize vulnerabilities and bugs. We have a much lower bar for what we consider a low, medium, high, being that an unsoundness bug in Rust will almost immediately become a security vulnerability, while in other languages you may see it as some sort of actual exploit needs to be realized for this to be a vulnerability, or this is not an exploitable bug, so therefore it's lower. And within the Rust project, they tend to not categorize it that way. And I'd see that from especially like the automation behind it. It's that finding a uniformity and a kind of common language. We have CVSS and various ways of scoring these vulnerabilities, but finding that common language that's more communicable and digestible by the maintainers, I think, would something that would really help with the automation of finding vulnerabilities, automating the pull requests and submitting them, because there are those discrepancies on not just how different communities rate security and handle vulnerabilities, but even just projects and maintainers as well. And I think so far we've built out standards and scoring methods across all of this, but we've now finally hit a point where we have these great overarching standards that don't cover our different scenarios, that we need to back up and think about those different communities and how this grand scoring scheme applies to each one.
This is very good insight. It's going to be changing a lot of what I've had designed. So thank you. Last question. Security researchers, maintainers, and organizations, they have their own disclosure policy. So due to the limited time, if the software industry could change or do one thing to improve this friction amongst the members, what could we do? again, silence.
Yeah, I think this is an open-ended question, and it kind of harkens back to what I mentioned previously, sort of about the kudos points of what a lot of security researchers are looking for. So, I see throughout my career, a lot of the friction I've ran into running bug bounty programs, also helping triage vulnerabilities for open source projects, is you run into the friction between the reporter and the reportee, and who wants things publicly released. You usually don't get friction on how this bug should be fixed, but it's more how fast you can fix it and how you want to disclose it. And that's where almost all of the friction I run into kind of occurs. And I think it's more up to the community as a whole to, probably discuss this, the open source community as a whole, to find, some sort of more common, reasonable language between everyone. So you don't have the person drive-by dropping reports, drive-by CVEs hitting you, the midnight burning oil of fixing vulnerabilities, and to, really have a more holistic kind of community-driven, aspect of, what is the decent way to do this? Because I don't think we've sat down and decided how do we be decent human beings to each other while reporting bugs.
Yeah, we see this discrepancy between vulnerability reporters and the committers. Usually the committers, they are not security experts and they don't even know about responsible vulnerability disclosure and stuff like that. So having someone in the middle, like a foundation, that can help both parties listen to each other and understand each other really helps. So if there is one thing that the committee could change, is to join a foundation, like the Linux Foundation, the Eclipse Foundation, or any other that provides such kind of service.
Yeah, I guess there's a balance that needs to be made. So what our approach has been, so there's the previous talk that was done by Amir. So we want to scale Amir, but at the same time, like there's approaches that you and Jonathan, you're taking about like creating a lot of like auto fixes and pushing that. We also want to humanize Jonathan. That didn't probably come out right. We want to humanize Jonathan's work and scale Amir's work, and that's where the balance is.
Yeah, I can't think of anything to say that doesn't sound like an advertisement to join the OpenSSF. So I think there's some good initiatives that are being promoted by the foundation. There could be, if the foundations or if the open source projects are big enough, just engage folks dedicated to doing security and vulnerability management and see where that takes people.
Well, I want to say thank you so much to our panelists for not only their contribution to the open source worlds, but to the knowledge they've shared today. I have another quick plug, Crow. For those that have attended in person, I almost fell. We will have Alpha Omega shirts, if I can hold it up. Alpha Omega shirts after our next break. You'll find it in the table in the back after the break. For those online, look for a message on our social media from OpenSSF on the Alpha Omega swag store that one day will be released. And that's where you can get your shirts. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.